Chapter 7. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. The phantom screeched in alarm. Not only did this not deter the person outside the car, but it made her even more aggressive. She kicked the car several times in a row. Bastard, what do you mean by leaving me behind? Luonan looked out of the car and his eyebrows jumped. Love go, smalt sag neck. What he saw was a raised snow-white thigh and the hem of the skirt that was almost torn. His gaze moved upwards and swept across the face of the person who had just arrived. After a brief moment of recollection, he was able to identify the person. It was Long Legs. Okay, this woman was called Lian Yu. She also participated in the club promotion event on the 24th. She was the representative of the student council. In the wee hours of the morning, it was this man who was hugging Xie Junping and was almost dragged into the car. However, when she was compared to Xie Junping's political life, she was abandoned like an old shoe. Luonan wasn't a moral judge. He was disinclined to judge anything and he didn't want to get tangled up with her. He simply pressed down the window and responded simply, Senior Xie is not here. Is something the matter, Senior Lian? Lian Yu stared blankly at the empty driver's seat. She was roused from her stupor by the sound of Senior Sister Lian. Her eyes were still a bit perplexed. She swept her gaze over Luonan's face twice before her figure suddenly left through the car window. Several seconds later, Luonan's car window was forcefully knocked on. Luonan shook his head and lowered the car window. He never expected that in the next moment 2 hands with manicured nails would reach in and grab him by the collar. They used all their strength to drag him out of the car window. Thief! Catch the thief! Lian Yu's sharp voice traveled far on the road. The surrounding group of car owners had previously been filled with gossip because of the long-legged beauty angrily kicking a luxury car. Now that there was a show to watch, their hearts were itching like a cat and they were all eager to take action. However, a group of young people who were still drunk were even more direct than them. They ignored the police's order and rushed out of the row of luxury cars at the back and swarmed over. The previous Lian Yu also came from there. He must have ended his night at the nightclub and was stuck here on his way back. Being robbed of the limelight by this group of lawless young people, the surrounding car owners did not dare to get close. What kind of people were they? In the midst of the sharp laughter, the young people first squeezed toward the window, but when they realized that the narrow space could no longer accommodate more people, they screamed and used their fists and legs against the flying car that was worth 500 million, trying to leave marks or damage on the body of the car. They did not care about the sharp alarm at all. Someone even used the hood of the car as a drum, creating a frenzied nightclub-style rhythm. Noisy, check the noise, sneak, catch the thief. Old Xie's tricks are not bad. He turned into a gigolo to scare me. Even the thief doesn't steal the car. It's shameful for old Xie to lose his car. Look. Is there anything in the trunk? In the chaos, someone really tried to open the trunk, but how could he open it? Instead, he was kicked in the butt by his companion and rolled under the car. The chaotic scene made the surrounding car owners dumbfounded. Though Luonan had been caught off guard by Lian Yu in the car at this time, his reactions were fast. He had just pulled up from the back of the chair when he grabbed onto Lian Yu's pulse, directly dispersing her energy. Lian Yu was in pain and lost her balance. She fell into the car and the two's faces came close in an instant. Right now, Lian Yu still had her nightclub-style makeup on. Her facial features were all the more deep and three-dimensional, charming and seductive. Luonan's gaze passed through the highlighter powder, blush and fake eyelashes. He saw the woman's swollen outline as well as the densely interweaving heterochromatic veins in the depths of her eyes. Adding in the reaction of the muscles under his fingertips, he could confirm, Lian Yu as well as her group of crazy companions, not only did they have a hangover, they had more or less taken drugs during the party. This didn't count for much in the circle of rich kids, but they had never thought about the trouble that could come from their unbridled display in public. Especially when there was an experienced police officer in the vicinity. Forget it. Relying on this group of people to use their brains was giving them too much credit. Luonan absolutely didn't want to be implicated by this group of idiots. He pushed Lian Yu away, but before he could think of a way to handle this, the middle-aged police officer walked back while talking to someone. The gaze he cast over grew increasingly vigilant. He even placed his hand on the firing position of his weapon. And at this time the car's AI emitted a warning sound once more. It was completely different from before. Attention. Receiving multiple methods of scanning. There is a risk of exposing your privacy. Activation recommended. The warning hadn't ended yet when a buzzing sound rang out. Dozens of small vigilante drones crossed over the congested car formation. They shuttled back and forth in the air above this area. An ice-cold mechanical voice transmitted down. All non-police personnel on the road, immediately get down with your hands on your head. You have already violated the provisions of Article 16, Section 5 of the Emergency State of Public Order Law. You shall receive an inspection. I repeat. The group of youngsters stared blankly at the small drones fluttering in the air like bats. The clamorous and chaotic atmosphere immediately dissipated by a large half. However, not everyone was able to maintain a basic level of sobriety. There was a warrior, who raised his middle finger towards the flock of bats in the sky. Police dogs, get out of the way. What responded to him was a throbbing electric flame. The warrior didn't even let out a grunt. His large face fell to the ground, emitting a muffled sound that caused people's hearts to tremble. The surroundings of the phantom flying car immediately emptied out. As long as they still had a brain, they immediately obediently got down on the ground with their hands on their heads. Even if there were a few who were numb, they were forcefully pulled down by their companions. There was no way to reason with the vigilante drones, right? Society had always been quite critical of AI police enforcement. They said that they had no sense of gravity and that it was easy to cause accidents. But when faced with a chaotic scene, the publicly accepted and most efficient method was still the drone cleansing. This method could eliminate human factors to the greatest extent and make it easier for all sides to explain. This group of well-trained rich second generations had long since understood that their special privileges would only be effective against living people. A wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. At most, they would go to the police station. Otherwise, what was the point of raising a lawyer for? Outside the car window, Lian Yu was also lying on the ground. Luo Nan had obtained peace and quiet, but this kind of peace and quiet wasn't what he wanted. The middle-aged policeman arrived by the side of the car. The youngsters on the ground were all quite obedient. At most, they would carefully shift their positions, afraid that the heavy exoskeleton armor would step on their heads or something. However, there were some people who firmly remembered the policeman's face. They swore to teach him a lesson in the future. The middle-aged policeman didn't pay attention to the careful thoughts of the youngsters on the ground. He stood by the car window and stared at Luo Nan. He also scanned the situation inside the car. The car's AI was still issuing a warning of privacy exposure. Luo Nan found it noisy and simply turned it off. He was very clear that the so-called multiple methods of scanning was most likely the work of this police officer's equipment. Luo Nan's heart was calm. He took the initiative to ask, "Officer, what's the matter?" Since Luo Nan cooperated, the middle-aged policeman followed the rules. He saluted Luo Nan and showed his identification. The identification showed that his name was Shui Weiluan. He was actually over 50 years old. It really couldn't be seen from his appearance. The negotiation between the two had been quite peaceful up until now. But this kind of atmosphere immediately collapsed when Officer Shui requested Luo Nan to open the trunk. Officer Shui grabbed a translucent box from the trunk. He didn't say anything more to Luo Nan. He simply opened the box. His armored fingers displayed astonishing nimbleness. Soon he saw the small sealed bottles within the box. He unscrewed one of the bottles and took out a capsule-shaped pill from within. He rubbed it lightly and specks of white powder sprinkled out. The red light of Officer Shui's waist-mounted scanner flashed. He turned his head to stare at Luo Nan with an unfriendly expression. The corners of Luo Nan's eyes twitched. His many years of experimental experience made him especially sensitive to certain drugs. He instantly realized the troublesome situation before him. Xia Junping, this troublemaker. Another absurd thought immediately popped into his mind. Perhaps he could get a channel from Xia Junping in the future? Xia Junping sneezed again. The tip of his nose glowed red. He knew that this was certainly the result of the resentment virus from many people. He caught a cold and was badly battered. He brought it all on himself. It wasn't easy for him to settle things with Meng Zhong for the time being. Then the unforeseen event in Xia City nearly scared him to the point of pissing his pants. There was still a bottle of True Fate in the car. How could he have forgotten? The one who informed Xia Junping of this news was none other than Miss Zhang Yingying of the hidden indigo firm. Right now the two no longer needed to be sneaky. It was fine to directly engage in virtual communication. With the support of AR technology, it was as if the two were conversing face-to-face in a reception room. Xia Junping had always cursed Zhang Yingying as a telephone operator. She did the work of receiving and handling calls in the hidden indigo firm. But he had to admit that this poison-tongued telephone operator was indeed a very eye-catching beauty. Zhang Yingying looked to be only 18 or 19 years old. Her medium short hair casually draped over her shoulders. Her facial features were bright and generous. She had a bit of a boy's aura, but her figure was not that of a boy's at all. It was already autumn. She wore a sleeveless camisole top. Her snow-white shoulders and neck were exposed. Two thin threads intersected above her steaming chest. It was enough to attract the gazes of all men. From the waist down she wore a short denim skirt. There were many layers of lace decorations. It was extremely cool. Right now her snow-white long legs were propped up high on the boss's table. Her Roman-style strappy sandals swayed left and right. She looked quite casual. The short denim skirt slid down to the base of her legs. But due to the angle there was no way to take advantage of her. Right now Xia Junping didn't have any thoughts of taking advantage of her. He paced back and forth in the room, restless and impatient. Everyone knew that low addictive psychotropic drugs were rampant throughout the world. It was simply inconceivable that this stuff wouldn't appear in private parties of the wealthy. But political opinion didn't care about this. As long as you were stupid enough to expose yourself, you would certainly be killed with a hammer. You wouldn't be given the opportunity to explain. In a certain sense, this was even more serious than him sneaking off to attend a party. And then there was the matter of his gang of scoundrels who ignited this fatal issue. Every thread was linked together. The consequences weren't as simple as 1 + 1. Lian Yu, you slut. Li Xueqing, I'll remember you. Lu Tao, you bastard. Xia Junping was like a trapped beast. He let out a mournful wail in an invisible iron cage. Of course he was even more anxious to know what the situation was over at Xia City. Had he already been implicated? What the hell are you raising lawyers for? Let them go. Zhang Yingying had a troublemaker stay away from me expression of disdain. She showed signs of slacking off. Xia Junping's mind was as clear as a mirror. This little girl was clearly treating him like a sheep again. The problem was that he was panicking in his heart. He could only smile apologetically. These are extraordinary times. It's more reassuring to hire experts like you. Of course the pay is sufficient. Zhang Yingying spread her hands. Then what do you want me to do? Go snatch people from the military transport ship? Military transport ship? Why the military? Xia Junping's voice had changed pitch. Zhang Yingying extended 3 fingers. The government, the military and Quantum Corporation. This research and development base, at least in name, was built by the cooperation of these 3 parties. Now a nuclear bomb has mysteriously exploded. Nuclear bomb. Xia Junping's face turned green. Don't misunderstand. I'm just making an analogy. In any case it's more or less the same. In short, no one can accept this result. But what in the world is going on? A natural disaster? Terrorist attack? Zhang Yingying's feet swayed back and forth. She was quite at ease. Right now all parties want an explanation. Especially the government and the military, these 2 hands-off bosses. In the past they enjoyed Quantum Corporation's filial piety. But now that something has happened, they discover that they know nothing about the situation in the laboratory. Who knows if this is an accident or a write-off? If we don't participate deeply, how are we going to explain this to the higher-ups? Xia Junping still couldn't understand. But it doesn't go as far as to throw them onto the military ship, does it? That's because you don't understand the gravity of the situation. Zhang Yingying's words smashed half of Xia Junping's soul away. Afterwards she extended her 5 fingers. This intelligence is worth this much. Xia Junping's face changed color. You're ripping people off. Zhang Yingying laughed. This is because of our long-term cooperative relationship. Otherwise, when we go outside, She flipped her slender white palm over with a very sincere appearance. Except. Xia Junping's face was ashen, but he still swallowed his anger. Since he was going to spend money, he would spend it all. Giving up halfway was the stupidest way to die. Zhang Yingying blew him a kiss. Relax, it's worth the money. Any intelligence related to the burner is worth the price. Burner. Yeah, I got the information from a reliable source. This is a high-end laboratory that specializes in the research of the burning mechanism. The emphasis is on neuroanatomy. Human body, living body. Xia Junping couldn't be blamed for letting his imagination run wild. The previous information related to Luo Yuandao had left a deep impression on him. Naturally, he would make associations. Zhang Yingying didn't come to a conclusion. On the project proposal, the experimental subject is written as a mutant. As for the rest, who knows? She paused for a moment and said, but this is all meaningless. The important point is that this laboratory was conducting a large-scale experiment this morning. The energy system was forcefully shut down by someone, causing the experimental body to go out of control. It led to a major accident and disastrous casualties. And the suspect took the opportunity to steal an important experimental prototype. Xia Junping blurted out, Deep Blue Walker. Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes at him. How is that possible? It's said that it's a new product developed by Quantum Corporation. It's a drug form. Right now, the surrounding area is under martial law. If it doesn't work, then the entire Xia city will be in chaos for a while. Oh, wait a minute. What does this have to do with them being carried onto the transport ship? Zhang Yingying responded in a relaxed manner. Right now the culprit is on the run. Whoever dares to create chaos won't be polite. Besides, those bastards are standing there. Each and every one of them is an eyesore. Who has the time to screen them one by one? It's better to just capture them in the name of the military. We can deal with them when we have the time. It saves us the trouble of going through the procedures. So that's how it is. Faster thief. Xia Junping suddenly discovered that he was definitely going to be a sheep's paw. Zhang Yingying had gone around in a big circle. This was tantamount to saying that Luo Nan and the others had encountered the government and the military going crazy. They had been caught in the crossfire. The nature of the matter wasn't as serious as he had imagined. In the end, this was how the 5 digits of information was used. Xia Junping wanted to go up and slap the table. He finally remembered that this was a virtual dialogue room, but his expression was extremely ugly. Zhang Yingying was very clear about his thoughts. She immediately shook her head and sighed. People like you are incurable. If it were your father, he wouldn't even have the time to be grateful. The important thing is the drug. The drug. Do I even need to spell this out? Chapter 8. Geniuses remember in 1 second. Love Go? Talk.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Chapter 8. Burning with Hunger Drugs. Drugs. Xia Junping wasn't stupid to the extreme. His mind came around, but his mood only worsened. Quantum Corporation didn't give people a way out. It must be known that the Xia family had a considerable amount of business in the field of the production and sale of cutting-edge drugs. But compared to Quantum Corporation, one of the world's top 3 giants in terms of market value, they were still lacking. Quantum Corporation rapidly rose to prominence after the war. At the beginning of the 90s, they proposed the concept of burners on the basis of archetype formatting theory. They single-handedly created the Deep Blue platform and introduced the Deep Blue Walkers. They changed the mode of war between humans and mutants, immediately reclaiming large amounts of traditional human territory. Just from this point alone, it could be said to be a great company that changed the world. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that Quantum Corporation appeared to be working on a weapons platform, but the nature of their research was in fact a major breakthrough in the life sciences. Their accumulation in related fields was absolutely one of the best in the world. Today, this giant of capital was finally extending its tentacles into the cutting-edge pharmaceutical field. The few pharmaceutical companies that the Xia family had a stake in were probably going to panic for a while. But upon careful thought, for any qualified capitalist, obtaining reliable information in advance was absolutely an astonishing amount of wealth. Zhang Yingying crossed her arms and sneered when she saw Xia Junping in a daze. Sheep, is it worth it? It's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Xia Junping's face had always been used to be sold. He laughed mischievously as he lightly slapped his own face. Yingying, you owe me a great favor. I'll remember your kindness for the rest of my life. Zhang Yingying's small face was so tender that water could be squeezed out of it. But she was essentially invulnerable. She didn't even bat an eyelid. Okay. This year's fees will increase by 50%, right? I'll thank you on behalf of the boss. Love go little sage net. Xia Junping immediately became listless. He hastily messed up his words. Oh right. Does Quantum Corporation and Luonan have a grudge? That archetype formatting theory. Zhang Yingying responded lazily. No matter how wrong Yen Hong is academically, the results he sold to Quantum Corporation are already set in stone. The size of an individual is meaningless when compared to a financial group. Quantum Corporation won't care about these little ants. Don't scare yourself, okay? Xia Junping was not really concerned about this matter, but he thought of another problem. He hemmed and hawed for quite a while before finally opening his mouth. Luonan has been brought onto the warship. Do you think he'll? If you're worried that I'll sell you out, just say so. Zhang Yingying sneered. Although it's normal to sell you out, from the looks of it there isn't any. According to reliable sources, he hasn't said a word since he was detained. Really? Xia Junping was a bit suspicious. Logically speaking, there was no need for Luonan to take the blame for him. Zhang Yingying shrugged. You'll never know what's on the mind of a hero of darkness who wants to leave his name in history. For example, videos. Video. That's right. Your 500 million renminbi phantom is recording the security footage automatically. Do you really think the police won't take it? Only then did Xia Junping react and his face paled. That. Zhang Yingying sighed. By the time you react, the police's criminal record will have turned to dust. Relax, it's already been deleted. Xia Junping clasped his hands together and expressed his thanks over and over. It's all thanks to your thorough consideration, Yingying. There's no need for me to take credit for someone else's work. This is yet another righteous act of the hero of darkness. Damn. Benevolence. Xia Junping was truly shocked this time. The car was under his name and this was an undeniable fact. As long as Luonan cooperated with the police and told the truth, and combined with the recorded video, it would be easy to remove suspicion. However, Luonan chose to delete the video and kept his mouth shut, giving Xia Junping leeway. This was a great favor. Xia Junping racked his brains, but he still couldn't understand how Luonan was able to do this. In the end, he could only sigh. Benevolence. Benevolence is unparalleled. Though he said this, Xia Junping was pondering in this instant. Should he push the boat with the current and let the hero of darkness take the blame? Compensation could be discussed later. But after some thought, it didn't matter if his strength took the blame or if he framed Luonan. The middle operation would certainly increase, and the uncertainty would increase by a large margin. In the end, the phantom flying car was under his name. It would be hard for him to wash himself clean no matter what. Also, when he thought of Luonan and those bewitching pupils, Xia Junping felt an indescribable chill in his heart. He wasn't sure of the bottom line. Yingying, say it. What? Are you thinking of something crooked? No. Nothing of the sort. Xia Junping thought for a bit. It really wasn't good to say those words, so he simply stomped his foot heavily. Forget it. Luonan had already gone this far. He couldn't be a coward. He would first fish the person out before anything else. Yep, before this, let the hero of darkness continue to be benevolent. Luonan, who was unparalleled in benevolence, was sitting by himself in a corner right now. His back and his body were covered with ice-cold metal plates. There weren't any markings on all four sides. The rough, cold, and hard characteristic of a warship stuck in his mind. Luonan quickly digested the mental foreign object, but it wasn't so easy for the others in the same cabin. Each and every one of them had restless appearances. No one would have thought that what was supposed to be a very normal public security incident would actually result in them being brought to a military ship and placed in confinement. In the beginning, this group of rich kids clamored about going through the procedures and hiring a lawyer. But not even a reply was heard after an hour had passed. There were only ice-cold combat robots guarding the outside of the sealed cabin. The bulky anti-riot guns looked panicky. In the end, the dozen or so people could only stare at each other and gradually calm down. Luonan's head hung low. His breathing was faintly discernible. It was 8 o'clock in the morning right now. Normally, Luo Nan would already be in the classroom waiting for class to start at this time. And he would certainly have eaten at least 5 portions of breakfast by now. The cost of maintaining the structure of the vessel wasn't cheap. It required a considerable amount of energy. Right now Luo Nan could only eat. He used the most traditional chemical method of humans to convert food into energy in order to replenish his consumption. And he had made a few extra preparations. For example, he carried an energy bar in his pocket. But today's accident had caused him to use up his energy bar early. He had no way to replenish his energy. Luo Nan felt as if a black hole had opened up in his stomach after his usual meal time. It endlessly squeezed out the energy from his flesh and blood. Under normal circumstances, the feeling of hunger shouldn't be this severe. But Luo Nan had no choice but to pay an extra price for being carried onto the transport ship. Luo Nan was forcibly detained due to the suspicion of illegally carrying banned drugs. Though the police didn't have the leisure to interrogate and deal with him, simple tasks such as urine testing and sampling were forcibly carried out not long after he boarded the ship. This was a procedure that had to be carried out. There was no reason for it. Luo Nan could point to the heavens and swear to the sun. He was 100% not a drug addict. He had never touched the drugs in the box. He was 100% not a member of Xie Junping's gang of scoundrels. But the problem was that he had injected an entire tube of drugs before leaving the house this morning. The ratio of banned ingredients was absolutely off the charts. Perhaps the amount of banned ingredients in the bodies of all the people present wouldn't even be a fraction of what he had. According to this logic, Luo Nan would really be like yellow mud falling into his pants. He wouldn't be able to explain himself no matter how hard he tried. Because of this, Luo Nan deliberately activated his Appetite King's skill the moment the incident occurred. He sped up his body's metabolism with all his might. Time sped up for Luo Nan. Chapter 9. A Genius in 1 Second Remembers Love? Speak. Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Most of the sensitive psychotropic drug ingredients that the police were concerned about had a natural metabolism time of 5 to 10 days. Luo Nan had completed this metabolism process in a short half an hour from the time he was arrested to the time he boarded the ship. Plus, he had to pay attention to the digestion of sensitive ingredients when he concocted the drug. Luo Nan only did a small control of his urinary system when he took samples. A normal urine test could be ignored. As for other test samples such as blood, hair and the like, frankly speaking, Luo Nan wasn't confident. So he didn't open his mouth from the moment he was forcibly detained. He didn't have the slightest intention of dragging Xie Junping into this. Not to mention that it was meaningless, he still needed to rely on that fellow to help him escape. There was more or less a price to pay for choosing this path. Luo Nan's metabolism sped up and his internal organs consumed large amounts of energy. This short hour was equivalent to Luo Nan fasting for over a week. His body fat consumption and muscle decomposition accelerated in order to ensure the supply of nutrients to his brain and nerve center. His neurons were excited and inhibited repeatedly, causing Luo Nan to feel terrible right now. Pain, numbness, and slight hallucinations endlessly assaulted his senses. Luo Nan sat motionless on the ice-cold deck of the ship. Actually, every muscle in his body was suffering. They were all twitching subtly. This was the sign of a functional disorder in his nervous system. He closed his eyes and completely ignored the grumbling rich kids around him. He chanted the 16-word mantra. In the beginning he chanted in an extremely fluent manner. A humming sound shook his brain. But the speed of his chanting grew slower and slower. His voice grew lower and lower. In the end, no sound came from between his lips and teeth. There were only short words that gurgled and flowed in his mind. My heart is a prison. My heart is a furnace. My heart is a mirror. My heart is a nation. Luo Nan's mind gradually gathered along with the flow of his heart. Distracting thoughts were eliminated and he naturally entered the visualization step. Silver thread-like lines constructed the structure of a tetrahedron, an inscribed sphere and an outer-scribed sphere in the void. It was like some sort of marvelous celestial body. It rotated in solitude within the dark space of the universe. Over the past 5 years he had been progressing hand in hand with his medicinal carving and chanting and breathing, forming a subtle correspondence between the vessel and the visualized image. Changes in the vessel would immediately affect the operation of the visualization diagram. On the other hand, adjusting the visualization diagram with one's mind could also roughly sort out the structure of the vessel, adjust the rise and fall of qi in blood, and affect the function of the organs. Luo Nan discovered that the damage to the vessel relied on the former. The accelerated metabolism and control of the urinary system relied on the latter. Of course, the latter was equivalent to interfering with the operation of the autonomic nervous system. It was an act that went against the natural physiology, and the price to pay was to suffer a backlash. Just like at this moment, there were some problems with the operating rhythm of the visualization diagram. Luo Nan had spent half an hour to accelerate his metabolism. Now he needed at least 3 times the amount of time to recover. Luo Nan had a certain amount of experience with this. His attitude was correct. In any case, he was imprisoned. He didn't need to think too much about the outside world. He just needed to slowly recuperate and everything would be fine. However, it didn't take long for him to realize that the situation wasn't as simple as it seemed. The visualized image operating in nothingness began to lag, and it was getting worse and worse. It was like a large-scale game running on a low-spec machine. No matter how hard it tried, it couldn't reach the perfect, smooth and full picture quality. Moreover, as the machine overheated, the condition was getting worse. Luf Gok smalt sag netku in the end, even the rhythm of chanting the mantra was affected. It was nearly impossible to continue the visualization. The backlash he suffered was actually this severe? Luo Nan didn't believe it. He stopped the visualization and muttered to himself for a moment. He adjusted his body and changed his sitting posture. Luo Nan sat cross-legged, just like a monk or a Daoist who meditated in ancient times. His entire body was firmly fixed on the deck. From the top of his head to the 2 sides, his shoulders, his elbows, and his knees formed 2 perfectly straight diagonal lines. They then connected to the ground, forming a solid pyramid. This pyramid sitting posture was a visualization technique his grandfather had taught him in his early years. It was the visualization diagram on the title page of the notebook. The pyramid-shaped tetrahedron was like the boundary of a limb. The inscribed circle contained the internal organs, the circulation of energy and blood. The circumscribed circle symbolized the external environment of the world. Thus the body and mind were one. The inside and the outside were opposite, and the visualization results were even better. Luo Nan usually used it to replace sleep when he was resting at night. Now he used it to strengthen the visualization results. He once again silently chanted the mantra and entered a meditative state, smoothly starting the visualization. The silver threads constructed a complete diagram structure, and it began to slowly rotate. At this very moment, Luo Nan wasn't a spectator but a participant. The boundary between him and the visualization diagram began to blur as he chanted the mantra. It was as if he had arrived in the boundless darkness. He had transformed into a towering pyramid that rotated in the void. In his daze, he felt that he wasn't moving at all. What moved was the squirming internal organs of his flesh and blood. What moved was the seemingly dark nothingness of the outside world. Between movement and motionlessness, the elements of harmony and disharmony were peeled off layer by layer and exposed. What the hell is this? There was clearly a power within the surrounding nothingness and darkness. Its volume wasn't large, but it was very solid. It was like a hand hidden within the darkness. He was always trying to pull the visualization diagram and disturb its stability and balance. Luo Nan tried to grab this hand, but he was completely unable to make sense of the form of existence that was opposite him. His senses grew clearer and clearer, but he was unable to touch it no matter how hard he tried. It was like a mosquito fluttering by one's ear at night. It came and went, making people loathe it. Or to be more precise, this was simply a specter that spiraled around inside and outside of his body. It wantonly devoured the essence of his flesh and blood, leaving him helpless. Stutter. After messing around for so long, it was a freaking virus. Luo Nan tried a few times, but it was hard to deal with it. Instead, his mind was in chaos. Distracting thoughts rose together, and he gradually grew impatient. He had no choice but to withdraw from the fixed space. But when he withdrew from the fixed space, his situation was even worse. Under the urging of his impatient emotions, the various itchiness, pain, and even slight hallucinations that had been produced due to the effects of hunger transformed into turbulent, distracting thoughts. They leaped up from his mind and brazenly counterattacked. He had the momentum to sit on the throne once more. Or it could be said that it was more like a ball of poisonous fire that rolled within his internal organs. Luo Nan's lips and teeth squirmed slightly. What came out was no longer the 16-word mantra. Instead, it was simple and illogical vulgar words. His current state was very bad. He knew it was bad, but he was unable to control it. It was without a doubt that he was in an even worse state. As his mind became unstable, the interference from the outside world was no longer that easy to block. But there were still people who forcefully came up to him. "Hey!" Someone laughed beside his ear. "Kid, are you scared stupid? Or are you deaf?" Luo Nan raised his head slightly. He couldn't even open his eyelids. His current state had consumed far too much of his energy. He was already not too sensitive to the outside world. He was completely unaware of what had happened before, and he had no interest in knowing. However, the other person was unwilling to let him off. "You're so young. Why are you acting so aloof?" Luo Nan finally raised his eyelids to gaze at the person who had come. It just so happened that this person was the only person he recognized in the room. Lian Yu. Chapter 10. Genius 1 second. Remember love go away? Speak net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Lian Yu had just come back to her senses. In this circle of rich kids, her position was somewhat ambiguous. The reason for this, aside from her family background, was that she was two-timing Xie Junping and her real boyfriend at the same time. Her position was unclear. Because of this, she suffered a wave of cynicism and ridicule when she was thrown off the car by Xie Junping in the morning. Could be said that she was mad with anger. Plus, she had a hangover and other problems. Luo Nan had become a target to vent his anger on the road, causing this incident. Lian Yu's thoughts underwent a subtle change after she calmed down in the detention room. Her anger towards Xie Junping didn't lessen in the slightest, but she had a new plan for Luo Nan. She had been observing Luo Nan all this time. The vast majority of the people in the cramped and noisy detention room were either depressed or noisy. They were full of negative energy from head to toe. Only Luo Nan, this big boy, who looked to be the youngest, sat quietly in the corner from beginning to end. Aside from changing into a strange sitting posture once, there was practically no movement from him. The shadow in the corner gently covered Luo Nan's body, blurring his silhouette and many details. But looking at it as a whole, it was fully coordinated. It was like a mask and cloak at a masquerade ball, dressing up a mysterious and profound character. Seemed to be very tasty. So Lian Yu moved closer to Luo Nan. She observed him at a close distance, with a touch of provocation. Luo Nan's delicate, pretty, and quiet appearance was exactly her cup of tea. If he took revenge on Xie Junping into consideration, then it would be even more interesting. Of course, before this, she first needed to figure out the relationship between Luo Nan and Xie Junping. She needed to figure out why Xie Junping was burning with impatience in the morning and why this little fellow came up when he turned around. Lian Yu's thoughts couldn't be hidden from others. Someone laughed weirdly to the side. "Lian Jiyu, he's a vegetarian. You guys can't get together." Vegetarian is also very refreshing. Lian Yu didn't mind people calling her by her nickname at all. Jiyu was the title of an imperial concubine in ancient times. Her status was illustrious, and it also had the meaning of charm and beauty. It couldn't be considered a bad name. As for using her beauty to charm people or even the evil intentions of not being the legitimate wife, she naturally disregarded them. Lian Yu herself indeed had a heroic spirit that didn't care about meat or vegetables, and she even had the capital to do so. Her well-defined facial features gave her a bit of a mixed-race look. What was really against the rules was her voluptuous and tall figure. She even purposely wore a burgundy tight-fitting short skirt that accentuated her seductive body parts while also showing off her slender waist and long legs to maximize her charm. Now, in order to keep warm, she borrowed a man's outer robe and put it on. But when she spoke, she habitually gestured with her hands, and the front of the robe opened naturally. Her unbridled snow-white skin and the shadow of her coy figure formed a first-class natural composition. It could simply suck in the eyes of the surrounding men. However, all Luo Nan felt was irritation and pain. Lian Yu's attitude towards Luo Nan had completely changed. He wanted to amuse him a bit. She giggled as she went to pat Luo Nan's shoulder as she spoke. She really didn't use much strength in her slap, but Luo Nan had already returned to the state he was in when he and Xie Junping had just parted ways. His face hurt from the mist. This slap was simply like an axe chopping down on his shoulder. In an instant his entire arm and half of his shoulder didn't seem to be his anymore. Luo Nan's entire face twitched, but Lian Yu only thought that he was nervous. She placed her hand on Luo Nan's shoulder and didn't let go. She borrowed a bit of strength and seductively bent down. "We're all fellow inmates who have gone through trials and tribulations together. Aren't you going to introduce yourself?" Any other man would enjoy this kind of benefit, but the current Luo Nan just wanted to smash a fist into her face. "It hurts. It really hurts." Luo Nan felt as if a fire was burning in his heart. In reality he had already clenched his fists tightly. But his remaining reason told him that there wasn't any deep hatred involved. It was just the habitual hunting of a carnivorous woman, that's all. Luo Nan tried to use this to disperse his energy and return to his normal state. He used as flat a tone as possible to reply, "Acumen College. 10th grade. Luo Nan. But it really is my junior. And it's a little fresh meat." Lian Yu was a bit pleasantly surprised. Right now she found Luo Nan more and more pleasing to the eye. His delicate and tender face paired with a cool expression. Yep, and that serious posture of meditation. She couldn't tell if he was angry or shy, but he really was very cute. She couldn't help but want to tease him a bit more deeply. She reached out her hand to touch Luo Nan's face. Her attitude was too obvious, and this insane benefit release aroused the jealousy of some people. Suddenly a hand reached over and grabbed Luo Nan's cheeks in a single step. The person was also laughing and giggling, but his fingertips exerted force, directly squeezing Luo Nan's face until it deformed. Fresh meat? Fresh. Luo Nan's heart thumped. His brain didn't work. He completely relied on his body's instincts to forcefully wave his hand and slap away this person's dirty hand. The intense emotions contained in this action were undoubtedly an intense stimulation to this group of alcoholics and drug addicts. The person who reached out his hand was already in a bad mood. He took advantage of the situation to kick over. "Motherfucker, you're being cocky." This kick fiercely stomped onto Luo Nan's shoulder with enormous strength. Luo Nan's body leaned to the side and even Lian Yu was pulled askew. The notebook on Luo Nan's knee slipped down amidst the chaos and was swept away by Lian Yu, who had lost her balance. She slid 2 to 3 meters away. Lian Yu was wearing 10-centimeter high heels. She nearly sprained her ankle in her fluster. She only didn't fall to the ground because she was supporting Luo Nan. She felt that she was in a sorry state and the anger in her heart suddenly rose. "Li Xueqing. What the hell are you doing?" In the end an even louder voice roared back. "What the hell am I doing?" Lian Yu was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She jumped 3 feet into the air amidst her shrill cry. Her fingertips, which were covered in manicured nails, greeted Li Xueqing's face. Actually, this kind of fight couldn't happen. Li Xueqing's slip of the tongue had already caused Xie Junping to lose face. If he were to make a move against Lian Yu, he would really have to scratch a few lines on his face. He wouldn't be able to mingle in this circle in the future. He dodged backwards and there would naturally be enough people coming up to stop the fight. This group of rich kids had just suffered a setback in their drive in prison. They were just about to raise their energy to the breaking point. Now that they could join in the fun, each and every one of them courageously scrambled to be the first. Let's not talk about whether they were in the right or not. It would be good if they could take advantage of a beauty. Lian Yu had already been hugged by 3 or 4 big men before she could even rush up. Words of persuasion left and words of persuasion right. Her entire body had eaten quite a bit of hands of justice from head to toe. She was so angry that her charming face was ashen. She flashed her high heels. No matter who it was, she gave them a heavy kick. She kicked the group of men until they scattered. In the end, the 2 girls who were acting as flower vases had seen enough of the excitement. They went over to persuade them half truthfully and half falsely. Only then did they manage to pacify them. On the other side, Li Xueqing had extricated himself from the crisis of having his face ruined, but his face was still damaged. He had a belly full of anger that he didn't know where to vent. His eyes darted all around before he finally saw the pretty boy who had caused the crisis. He stood up shakily and went to pick up the dropped notebook as if nothing had happened. Li Xueqing didn't even think. He charged over and kicked Luo Nan's lower back. Chapter 11. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. There were many people to the side and the space was narrow. Li Xueqing didn't use his full strength. He only kicked Luo Nan to stagger, but Li Xueqing himself nearly slipped and fell. Love Goat smalled said Netka he had finally regained his balance and was about to rush forward again. Luo Nan suddenly turned around at this time. Strangely enough, when their eyes met, Li Xueqing felt an inexplicable panic in his heart and unconsciously stopped walking. Lian Yu had already calmed down. Li Xueqing's actions had attracted everyone's attention. Li Xueqing's actions were obviously inappropriate, but Luo Nan wasn't a person of this circle. This group of rich kids had no obligation to mediate. Not to mention that there were quite a number of people who were still brooding over the can of destiny in the phantom flying car. Even if there was a 9% chance that Xie Junping was the culprit, as long as there was a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 chance, they would be able to shift their resentment onto Luo Nan. Everyone looked on with cold eyes. Lian Yu, on the other hand, felt the attitude of the group of scoundrels in the circle. It was not good for her to step forward and intervene. With an ashen face, she angrily stood at the side. Of course, Li Xueqing knew the attitude of his companions. He really did have the heart to go up again. But he didn't know why, even though Luo Nan's face was ashen like a corpse and he looked like he could be blown over by the wind. Li Xueqing was unable to take a single step when he looked directly into Luo Nan's eyes. 1 or 2 seconds wasn't a problem, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds had passed and he still hadn't moved. This was a F***king battle pose. The surrounding scoundrels had obviously noticed something and were already laughing in a low voice. Li Xueqing felt even more embarrassed. In the past, when it came to this kind of thing, there would naturally be bodyguards in attendance to take care of it. Who the F***ck knew that they would feel so uncomfortable when they were on the spot. She couldn't help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. She saw that Luo Nan's notebook was right under her feet, so she simply stomped her foot to vent her anger. She stomped right in the center of the notebook. The thick book instantly caved in and a faint cracking sound came from between the pages. Across from him, Luo Nan was suddenly stupefied. Li Xueqing immediately understood when he saw Luo Nan's expression. His foot had truly stepped into the pit of Luo Nan's stomach. Li Xueqing immediately felt great pleasure. Even the feeling of cowardice that was wrong dissipated quite a bit. He added more force to his feet and his heel made a good circle on the notebook. At the same time he drew out his voice, rising and falling rhythmically like an aria. I'm sorry. Li Xueqing's actions were actually very tasteless and degrading, but since they were on the same side, there were quite a few people around who were laughing and jeering. As for how much was helping and how much was mocking, it was up to the person to decide. Li Xueqing's confidence grew with momentum. He raised his hand and pointed at Luo Nan. Kid. His voice had just left his mouth when his throat suddenly choked up. This was because he saw Luo Nan walking towards him. The entire cabin was no more than 20 square meters. After more than 10 people were stuffed in, it was already very crowded. The distance between 2 people was really just a matter of 2 steps. Li Xueqing's heart twitched inexplicably. At the same time he met Luo Nan's eyes once more at a close distance. Luo Nan's appearance was very delicate and pretty, but his eyes weren't beautiful. At least this was how Li Xueqing saw it. Luo Nan's pupils were mottled, as if they were flowing with lustrous and dazzling colors. But in the end they were controlled by a gloomy and cold tone. Li Xueqing inexplicably thought back to the strange collection he saw in the private garden of a certain best friend. A mutant that was as bloodthirsty as its life. This savage and ruthless beast was over 5 meters long. It was majestic like a mountain, and it was trapped behind layers upon layers of electrical webs. Its body was covered in cuts and bruises, but Li Xueqing couldn't help but shudder when the beast's eyes stared straight at him. Luo Nan's physique was naturally unable to compare with the enormous mutant. But the problem was that there was a glass wall that was harder than steel between Li Xueqing and the vicious beast. There was also a high-voltage electrical net and other lethal mechanisms on standby. And now there was nothing at all. Li Xueqing's heartbeat sped up and his pupils dilated. He opened his mouth to shout, but even he himself didn't know what to shout. The problem was that he clearly opened his mouth, but not a single sound came out. Not only that, but his tongue, throat, chest, and all the muscles in his body instantly stiffened. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. His consciousness was clear, but he couldn't get out no matter what. He could only watch helplessly as Luo Nan walked forward. Luo Nan extended his arm, and Luo Nan's 5 fingers lightly clasped onto his throat. It was really just a light touch, and he could not feel any strength. But at this moment, the air in his lungs was quickly sucked out, and his nostrils, mouth, and even pores all over his body were forcibly sealed, as if he was wrapped in a thick and airtight plastic film. His internal qi could not flow out, and neither could his external qi enter. He could not even sweat. His heartbeat increased rapidly, but the amount of oxygen in the blood he pumped out continued to drop. The terrifying feeling of suffocation was like an overflowing tide, slowly but surely filling his brain. Li Xueqing desperately wanted to open his mouth, wanted to breathe, wanted to beg for mercy. He used all the strength in his body, but only his eyeballs bulged, almost popping out of their sockets. The color of blood seeped through her vision bit by bit. Her tear ducts were stimulated. She forced herself to cry, but she couldn't wash away the filthy color. The only thoughts in his mind had collapsed, and only the purest desire to survive remained. He was still struggling with great difficulty. Save me! Save me! Someone save me! Li Xueqing himself did not know, but he was actually able to make some sounds. It was the kind of sound where the muscles in his throat were stiff. It was a sharp sound that squeezed out of his throat, a sound that could die at any moment. Woo-woo woo-woo. At the same time, his face turned from white to red, from red to purple, from purple to black. His eyeballs had already popped out of their sockets by nearly a centimeter, beginning to reveal large amounts of the whites of his eyes. It was as if his blood and energy would explode in the next moment. Each and every one of the rich kids in the cabin were stupefied on the spot. They were unable to understand the pain Li Xueqing was facing. They only saw Luo Nan walk over, extend his hand and choke Li Xueqing's neck. Li Xueqing was completely scared silly. He actually did not resist in the slightest. Luo Nan looked weak and delicate, but the strength of his hand was terrifyingly great. The current Li Xueqing looked like he could go into shock from suffocation at any moment. He might even die on the spot. No one knew why Li Xueqing was such a coward. But Luo Nan's ferocious strength was even more frightening. At this very moment, everyone believed that Luo Nan was really going to strangle Li Xueqing to death. There were also some people who were clear-headed. They felt that Luo Nan's body movements had a sort of indescribable awkwardness. It was as if he was exerting strength, yet not exerting strength. It was completely out of step with Li Xueqing's pain, so much so that the entire situation was extremely uncoordinated. But this wasn't the most important thing. What truly made people's scalps go numb was Luo Nan's face. Yes, look at his face. Luo Nan's face was originally pale and gray like a corpse. But right now there was a drunken red glow that spread and piled up. Excitement, right? Excitement, right? This scene was like an incorporeal whip that lashed at the hearts of the surrounding people. Let's not talk about the feeling of the flesh, but their hearts were twitching. Damn pervert. Homicidal maniac. He hid it so deeply. What are you looking stupidly for? Hold him back. Lian Yu's sharp voice tore through the almost sticky fear. She was the first person to react to the stress. She disregarded everything and charged towards the pile of stiff bodies in front of her. The group of people in front couldn't maintain their balance, especially the one at the very front. How far was he from Wuxia? A servant in front was about to touch her, and this fellow was a coward. He actually let out a blood-curdling scream. But no matter how unwilling the people in the front row were, the sudden explosion of crowding and chaos still pushed them towards Luo Nan. The weight of 7 or 8 people piled together. Even though Luo Nan didn't use his full strength, he still made Luo Nan stagger. His hand that was stuck to Li Xueqing's throat actually slipped away. This scene gave many people courage. There were people in the very front row who simply screamed, "Ah, ah, ah." They closed their eyes and opened their arms. It was a completely unreasonable bear hug rushing to cling to Luo Nan. With the first came the second. Under the drive of the herd mentality, a large portion of the people rushed forward. The cabin was in chaos for a time. Luo Nan was pushed away amidst the chaos. but Li Xueqing fell heavily to the ground. He had already sunk into unconsciousness, unconscious. Traces of extreme fear still remained on his face. Things had gotten out of hand. Beep beep beep. A sharp alarm rang. The armed mechanical soldiers that had been there all along were instantly activated. They turned around and pointed their anti-riot guns at the chaotic crowd. Chapter 12. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Zhou.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. In this arrest operation, although the military police had thrown the person here without any follow-up measures, it did not mean that they had completely given up. In fact, there had always been surveillance cameras in the cabin to monitor everyone's vital signs. It was only when they discovered that Li Xueqing was in a state of shock that they took emergency measures. The armed mechanical soldiers were completely cold and ruthless. They would not care about the cause and effect, right and wrong. They would strictly follow the fixed procedure and open fire with anti-riot guns. The high-voltage pulse covered the entire detention room. Everyone who was standing was the target of the attack. Even Lian Yu and the other girls were not spared. Correspondingly, the electric current penetrated his body. The electric currents formed a closed circuit with the human nervous system, stimulating the muscles and instantly putting them into a state of rigidity. Everyone was completely defenseless and fell to the ground. The chaotic situation was immediately swept away. No, there is one more. Luonan was forcefully controlled by the bunch of rich kids. Some grabbed him by the waist, some hugged him by the legs. Perhaps it was because he had a few more layers of meat shields, but he didn't collapse immediately. He staggered a few steps and finally managed to maintain his balance. His body was half bent and his hands were on his knees. His calves seemed to be trembling and swaying as if he could fall at any time. But even so, Luonan still stood there. He raised his face slightly and the blood-red color on his face faded a bit. His eyes stared fixedly over the bars of the detention room, staring at the muzzles of the armed mechanical soldiers. The armed mechanical soldiers also coldly locked onto their only target. Just as they were about to attack again, soldiers in combat uniforms rushed in from the door. The person in the lead was a captain officer. Retreat. The voice-controlled command was issued, and the armed mechanical soldiers' electronic eyes immediately turned black. Love, go, small, say, neck. The captain's gaze swept across the room and he said sternly, everyone, get on the floor and put your hands behind your head. He didn't say what the consequences would be if he didn't do it, but no one wanted to test the law. Even though the numbness had not completely passed, the group of people were still correcting their postures, each of them more obedient than a lamb. Lian Yu sneakily raised her head and cast her gaze towards Luonan. There should be many people like her who strongly felt that this sinister and ruthless pervert was stubborn to the end and wouldn't obey the captain's orders. But reality left them completely flabbergasted. Luonan crawled down slowly and with great difficulty, but he was extremely obedient. His hands crossed and held the back of his head. Since Luonan had moved a few steps before, he was a bit closer to Lian Yu's position. From Lian Yu's angle, she just happened to see Luonan's face. He seems to be trembling. It can't be that he only understands fear now, right? Before he could finish his thought, he heard a faint buzzing sound. It sounded like a bee flapping its wings, carrying a faint rhythm. The source of the voice was none other than Luonan. Only now did Lian Yu discover that although Luonan was lying on the ground, his posture was a bit different from the others. He rested his chin on the ground and looked straight ahead. His lips moved slightly and the strange sound came from them. It looked like a wasp with a broken wing struggling on the ground. Could it be that this fellow had gone mad? Lian Yu shuddered and secretly clenched her teeth. She cursed a certain someone who was hundreds of kilometers away. Xia Junping, you bastard, just what kind of people do you know? Xia Junping certainly wouldn't reply, but the military quickly made a judgment. From the perspective of Lian Yu and the others, the armed mechanical soldiers and military personnel appearing one after the other meant that the matter had certainly gotten out of hand. They didn't know how they would be dealt with. But reality proved that in the eyes of the military, a small conflict caused by a group of temporarily detained youngsters was nothing more than a fart. When all was said and done, the military only assisted the police in managing the case. There was no need to waste energy on this. The final treatment was merely to carry the unconscious Li Xueqing out for treatment. Then they dragged Luo Nan, who didn't fit in with the others, to lock him up by himself. No one objected to this. Even if they did, it would be meaningless. But Luo Nan spoke in a low voice as he was being brought out. "There's still my notebook. It's coming. It's coming." Lian Yu and the others all stared with wide eyes. They wanted to see how this deeply hidden pervert would reveal his vicious and untamed side. However, the development of the situation made a fool of them once again. The captain didn't get angry. Instead, he indicated for his subordinates to go into the cabin and pick up the notebook. He picked it up and flipped through 2 pages. When he saw the cracked flexible screen, he gave it a few more glances. Then he handed the notebook back to Luo Nan. Luo Nan didn't say anything more. He obediently followed the escorting soldier and left. He was quiet and restrained from head to toe, just like the impression he gave others in the beginning. While Lian Yu and the others looked at each other in dismay, Luo Nan was brought into a solitary confinement room. It wasn't too far from where he was locked up before. Since it was a solitary confinement room, the space was narrow. It was reasonable. There was only a single metal chair placed in the room, and it was fixed to the ground. It would pretty much fill up the rest of the space if it was turned in a circle. This was the place that claustrophobic people were most afraid of, but Luo Nan didn't care. He sat on the chair and the notebook was naturally placed on his knees. He first wiped away the footprints and dirt on the cover, then he carefully opened it. The metal ring frame of the notebook was already a bit deformed from Li Xueqing's heavy trampling and crushing. The opening and closing tab wasn't too flexible either. But this kind of damage wasn't much compared to the flexible e-ink screen. It was unknown where Li Xueqing got his strength from, but the flexible e-ink screen, which was extremely flexible and tough, had over a dozen fine cracks. Some of them ran through the entire screen. It looked like the flexible e-ink screen would fall apart with just a bit more strength. However, the flexible e-ink screen could still be used even in this way. The screen lit up with a light swipe. Luo Nan felt a bit relieved. Next, he didn't care about anything else. He directly opened up his most commonly used drawing software. The familiar loading sign lit up and he soon cut into the normal interface. The draft of the burning wraith appeared on the highest level. It looked quite normal. Luo Nan let out a long breath. He pressed his finger long, wanting to enter the next level interface. But the temperature of his breath didn't even have time to change when the flexible e-ink screen suddenly darkened. It automatically shut down without a trace of light. It was like an ominous black post that had been smeared with ink. Luo Nan tried many different methods to reboot the screen, but he didn't see any reaction. He began to stare blankly as he faced the pitch-black, shattered screen. The miniature camera in the corner locked onto Luo Nan's stupefied and stiff face, transmitting it to another cabin on the warship. There, the freshly minted lawyer Zhang Yingying rushed over looking travel-worn. She was currently handing over legal documents to the relevant person in charge of the ship. Right now, she had changed into an old-fashioned ash-black dress suit. Her hair was coiled up in a bun. The only bright color on her body was the gorgeous sapphire blue scarf around her neck. Oh, there was also that pair of slender and long calves. They were directly exposed to the air. Her entire body was flawless, and the texture of her skin appeared even more exquisite under the support of her black velvet high heels. It was as if she was glowing with a jade-colored light. The one who was connected to Zhang Yingying was the transport ship's logistics deputy supervisor. This somewhat stout lieutenant colonel officer had the surname Lu. He had already received a warning beforehand. Even though the mature-dressed female lawyer had a tender face, she looked suspicious no matter how he looked at her. He didn't have any intentions of getting to the bottom of things. Of course, perhaps this had something to do with the reason why his eyes kept glancing downwards. Chapter 13. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Lieutenant Colonel Lu was a bit frivolous, but he had cultivated a habit of caution from working in logistics for a long time. This caused him to have some misgivings about the situation itself. The others are easy to deal with, but this kid called Luo Nan is a bit suspicious. He's so young yet he acts so ruthlessly. His reaction after the matter is quite odd. Zhang Yingying replied seriously, "It's a pity that this happened, but I think that this kind of hot-blooded conflict will not affect the judgment of the case itself. Of course, the military is only responsible for temporary custody and will not comment on the matter." Lieutenant Colonel Lu said this for the time being. Soon he revealed a smiling face. According to the orders of the higher-ups, Luo Nan and his group will have to wait until the investigation of the incident is complete before they can be screened and archived. I estimate that there are at least 8 hours left. We weren't allowed to communicate with the outside world before this. Xiang, you're early. Speaking of which, the officers' activity room on the ship has quite good coffee. Why don't I invite Miss Zhang over to kill some time? Zhang Yingying didn't even blink in the face of such a crude method of picking up girls. She directly refused. "That's not necessary. My client looks like he has nothing left to live for. It's better for me to keep an eye on him." Lieutenant Colonel Lu shrugged. "It should be the damaged flexible screen. It has a special meaning to him. For example, a birthday present from his father." Zhang Yingying raised her eyebrows. "Father's gift? Good idea." Lieutenant Colonel Lu was a bit stupefied. He couldn't match the thought process of the young lawyer in front of him, but in order to achieve his goal, he still revealed a smiling face and flaunted those vague philosophies. Adults need to carefully decide on a reason to allow themselves to be vulnerable. Children, on the other hand, are much more casual. They can be defeated at any time, but they can recover quickly because they are still under the protection of their family. Their father will soon make up for it. When my client was 4 years old, my father abandoned him, patted his butt and disappeared. Love go, smalt Sagnetku, was this another rejection? Lieutenant Colonel Lu felt rather embarrassed for a moment. He retreated with his tail between his legs, but he was also unwilling. Just as he was in a dilemma, he saw Zhang Yingying give him a thumbs up. "That's why I have to say, Mr. Lieutenant Colonel, what great intuition." Zhang Yingying hooked her index finger and thumb, and the other 3 fingers cut in the air. "Did you know 60 years after the advent of flexible e-ink screen products, there were more than 200 brands and more than 3,000 products in the world? However, the one in my client's hand is not any model on the market." Lieutenant Colonel Lu was confused, but it was good to be able to chat with a beauty. He tried hard to think. "It's a private production?" "That's right. My client's father is a first-rate industrial designer. Before he left his job and went missing, he had outstanding work experience in both the production and creative departments of Quantum Corporation. Making such a gift for my only son is the most appropriate." Lieutenant Colonel Lu made a rough estimate. "In other words, it has at least 12 years of history? Phew. But I have to say, it will be very difficult for you to claim a high compensation from the Vandals based on this." Zhang Yingying smiled and naturally wouldn't explain any more to Lieutenant Colonel Lu. In fact, when she was in the office, she had already done a more detailed analysis based on the flexible e-ink screen video she had obtained in the morning. Even though Luo Nan's flexible e-ink screen wasn't a product that could be found on the market, the material used to make it was a must. For example, that ultra-thin panel belonged to the Jellyfish series, which was released in the beginning of the year 2090. This proved that the earliest time Luo Nan received this gift was in the year 90. In other words, it was very likely that Luo Nan's father, who had been determined to be missing or even dead, was still maintaining contact with Luo Nan. Perhaps it was just this little bit. The year 90. The incident with Lu Hong was also in this year. There's also the Quantum Corporation's burners and the Deep Blue platform. It really seems to be very crucial. Zhang Yingying gazed at the silent and stiff big boy on the monitor screen. She suddenly really wanted to know what kind of feeling Luo Nan would have when he was only 10 years old on a certain day in the year 90 when he received this gift from his father, who was nowhere to be found. Was he reminiscing right now? The monitor screen didn't transmit Luo Nan's thoughts, but it clearly transmitted his body movements. After sitting silently for a long time, Luo Nan finally made a new movement. He stood up, closed the broken notebook and placed it on the chair. He himself took a step towards the door. Since the space was narrow, Luo Nan's body leaned slightly forward at this distance. His forehead stuck to the thick and cold metal door. He maintained this position for a few seconds. During this time one could see him take a few deep breaths. Up until now, Luo Nan's movements were very easy to understand. He was doing his best to calm his state of mind. But Luo Nan's next actions were incomprehensible. On the monitor screen, Luo Nan moved a bit. He adjusted the distance, but his gaze was always directed towards the metal door. He was focused and serious, as if there was an incomparably exquisite work of art in front of him. A full minute passed before he closed his eyes again. He extended his hand and let his fingertips slide across the surface of the metal door, touching it from one end to the other. This wasn't the end. His fingertips streaked across the corner of the wall, touching the metal plate wall to continue his previous actions. And so Luo Nan walked round and round within the cramped space. His fingertips carved out continuous incorporeal marks on the metal wall. What's going on? The changes were strange and inexplicable. Lieutenant Colonel Lu was a bit dizzy. Zhang Yingying didn't respond. He just watched with interest. This lawyer was drunk. All right, Lieutenant Colonel Lu felt that this couldn't continue. After all, Luo Nan was still a minor. If by any chance he were to suffer some sort of stimulation and go crazy from holding it in, then his military career would come to an end. He indicated to his subordinates to prepare for intervention measures. The confinement room had tranquilizer spray equipment. It was prepared to prevent the mental confusion and even self-harm of the confinement personnel. But Luo Nan's footsteps stopped at this time. It was as if nothing had happened before. He picked up the notebook on the chair and sat down as before. He flipped to a blank page in the notebook and took out the electronic pen. He pulled out the sensor pen tip and the back half of the pen turned into a fluorescent pen that could be used to write on paper. Luo Nan's pen tip descended under Lieutenant Colonel Lu's astonished gaze. He drew crisscrossed dark lines on the paper. His pen moved extremely quickly and he was extremely proficient in simple strokes. A rough outline appeared in a few breaths of time. Lieutenant Colonel Lu gestured to the monitor to give a close-up. The outline of the lines on the paper resembled a building. Though it was only a sketch, some of the details such as the sealed fence, thick walls, narrow windows, and so on were put together to give people a strong hint. This was a prison. It was just that there was a kind of unnatural misalignment in the overall configuration. It was as if there was a kind of power that intervened between the intangible and the tangible, distorting this building. Lieutenant Colonel Lu only half understood what he was looking at. He heard a slight sound from his side at this time. He turned his head to look and saw Zhang Yingying's eyes focused on the monitor screen. The tips of her feet subconsciously tapped the floor lightly. Her expression was unprecedentedly focused. Oh, perhaps there wouldn't even be a reaction if he extended his hand to touch the young lawyer's pert, but right now? Chapter 14. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Luo Nan didn't know that someone was paying close attention to his every move. Even if he knew, he wouldn't have the extra mental energy to pay attention to it. His condition was very bad. Hunger, pain, numbness, and hallucinations. These negative elements that originally existed only increased as time passed, not decreased. Moreover, they gradually converged and turned into a corrosive poisonous fire, driven by some invisible force, drifting around his internal organs, limbs, and bones. The so-called incorporeal power was none other than the specter that Luo Nan had discovered through his visualization. The specter of today no longer had the mass of a mosquito. It controlled poisonous flames to flow within the depths of Luo Nan's flesh and blood. It constantly devoured essence and energy, growing and strengthening, and it continued to exert more and more interference on Luo Nan. It formed an effect similar to a blockade. Every time Luo Nan tried to calm his heart and clear his thoughts, enter a meditative state and study the source of the specter in detail, intense disturbances would come howling from the plane of his body and mind, blasting him out. If things were to continue like this, Luo Nan would sooner or later be exhausted to death by the specter if he were to enter the fixed space and suffer the backlash of failure. Wraith had been trying to stir up Luo Nan's emotions. It was just like his conflict with Li Xueqing. Luo Nan had used a fatal psychological suggestion to nearly kill Li Xueqing. His ears clearly reverberated with the faintly discernible laughter of the specter. He was just a little bit away from breaking the string of reason. Luo Nan also remembered the moment his palm pressed against Li Xueqing's throat. Li Xueqing's fear and despair melted within his flesh and blood, converging into a surging wave of heat that rushed in. However, it was destined to be a turbid flow. Not only could it not be used by him, but it even swept away some of his essence qi. In the end, it disappeared without a trace, but it was not hard to imagine where it went. The specter used this method to rapidly grow and strengthen. It squeezed Luo Nan's living space step by step. Naturally, Luo Nan was in a bad mood right now. But if one looked closely, this feeling was mostly a bad experience of old memories being stirred up to the point where the dregs floated up. He was very dissatisfied. Just now, because of the laptop, because of the flexible e-ink screen, he was so angry. This shouldn't have happened. The flexible e-ink screen had been with him for 5 years, and he was used to forgetting everything except its actual functions. But where did that ruthlessness and impulse come from? After that, how did his absent-minded state of mind surge out? Was it because his flesh and blood contained a certain person's genes? That coward. Hehe. The irony was that the active interference of the specter gave Luo Nan a very good explanation, so much so that he actually felt a bit of subtle relief. Attributing everything to ghosts, that made things much simpler. The specter's blockading interference had indeed caused a lot of trouble. But why did he have to stubbornly smash his head until it bled? Luo Nan entered the fixed space in hopes of drawing support from that state to further understand the specter. He wanted to make contact with it, capture it, and exterminate it. Ghost's obstruction and interference proved that his train of thought was correct. From Luo Nan's point of view, the one with a one-track mind should be Wraith. In order to understand something, one didn't necessarily have to go through the fixed state. Luo Nan had a more direct method, a pen and a piece of paper. Over the years he had collected character materials, described the surrounding scenery, and sketched countless times on the spot to capture the characteristics of others. His writing might not have been methodical, but he had long trained his acumen to be first-rate. Now, all he needed to do was to create a special self-portrait. Lines flowed down from the tip of the pen, piling up layer upon layer and intertwining with each other. His mind was neither close nor distant. He was focused and relaxed, fluid and agile. There was actually a tendency to go out of control. In a certain sense, hand drawing was freer than visualization. The visualization diagram seemed to come out of thin air, but it was actually very strict. It had to maintain a certain synchronization with one's body and mind. It couldn't be increased or decreased at will. But a sketch drawn on a piece of white paper was different. It came from reality, yet it could be separated from reality. It could be used to describe certain thoughts and concepts through virtual, fantasy, and symbolic brushwork, completely liberating one's inspiration. Back in the day, his grandfather was able to use hand-drawn diagrams to express the marvels of formatting theory. Today, Luo Nan could use similar methods to describe and explain the changes that occurred to his body. This change could even be deduced on paper. It was a step ahead, forming a pre-made draft for a great work of art. Therefore, Luo Nan drew a prison that didn't exist in reality to symbolize the most prominent idea in his mind. This was the first time Luo Nan had been imprisoned in his entire life. It was a novel experience, and he naturally linked it to the first sentence of the 16 words mantra. My heart is like a prison. Luo Nan believed that the 16 words mantra was certainly some sort of interpretation of formatting theory from his grandfather. The words, prison, furnace, mirror, nation, and so on were even direct descriptions of the level of formatting. And according to his deduction of the sequence, the format of prison might be an advancement of container. Therefore, he used the cold and cramped confinement room as a reference. He used the free and smooth edge of his brush to gather the faintly discernible inspiration. He even used the indescribably wonderful energy to construct a marvelous building that belonged solely to him on paper. Of course, he knew that the structure of the prison he drew was mostly fantasy. He might not be able to use it on the formatting, but as long as he had the clue of inspiration, it was enough. As for the distorted picture, it was easier to explain. This was because the picture reflected reality. The power that distorted the building came from within the building. The incorporeal and shadowless specter was the instigator of all this. He couldn't see the specter, but he could indirectly sense its existence through the distorted picture. The more elements appeared under the brush, the closer this self-portrait was to reality. At this very moment, the tip of Luo Nan's brush and his thoughts merged into one. They were indistinguishable from each other. It was as if there was no space between them, The imaginary world of nothingness was like a picture scroll that unfolded before Luonan once more. The outline of a tetrahedron, its inscribed sphere and its circumscribed sphere appeared clearly. It overlapped with the prison on the paper to form a marvelous picture. It didn't matter if he couldn't enter the fixed space. He could reproduce the fixed space here. In fact, the reproduction of the fixed space proved that Luonan's state of mind had already eliminated the interference of external forces. The specter's movements were meaningless. The tip of Luonan's brush did not stop. His state of mind had already returned to the fixed space. The specter who had been interfering and destroying all this time was caught off guard. It finally revealed its strange appearance. Other colors seeped into the originally empty darkness outside the visualized diagram. It was a kind of oppressive dark red. It was like a struggling flame within the ashes that had yet to be extinguished. It seeped and blended with the darkness to form a somewhat fuzzy silhouette together. This thing swam within the darkness, sticking to the visualized diagram in an attempt to penetrate inside. And it had already penetrated quite a bit. If it were someone else, they would need to spend some time to find the boundaries of this monster. But Luonan recognized its appearance with a single glance. The burning wraith. It was precisely this wraith that was faintly discernible during the earthquake in the R&D district. It howled and nearly took Luonan's life. Afterwards, it concealed itself into nothingness, making it hard to trace. Luonan even left its image on the drawing software. If he hadn't encountered his true fate, Luonan would already be at school right now. He would be looking up information, striving to find the slightest trace of the wraith. How could he have imagined that this fellow would actually be in such a state, wandering within his consciousness, fusing with his flesh and blood? Luonan didn't stop writing, but his lips curved into a light smile. Hey, you're smiling. You're smiling. Lieutenant Colonel Lu cried out involuntarily. Then he felt extreme shame. He felt that he must have been infected by Luonan for him to make such a fuss over nothing. Zhang Yingying was also very curious about Luonan's current state of mind. Unfortunately, the monitoring screen was destined to be unable to detect Luonan's thoughts. On the other hand, a beep rang out from the monitoring room. The door opened and someone walked in with large strides. Zhang Yingying looked back with curiosity. She saw that the person was wearing a well-ironed sky blue uniform. He didn't wear a military rank. He was clearly out of place in the room filled with deep space gray aerospace army uniforms. Lieutenant Colonel Lu turned his head to look at the person. His brows slightly furrowed, but he quickly squeezed out a smile. He walked a step forward and spoke with a chuckle. Assistant Yen. How's the search going? Chapter 15. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Sure, Net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Assistant Yen didn't immediately respond to Lieutenant Colonel Lu's greeting. His gaze first swept over Zhang Yingying, pausing for a moment, just in time to meet the latter's gaze. Love, go, small, say. Net Assistant Yen was in his early 30s and of medium height. He might not even be as tall as Zhang Yingying in high heels, but his posture was strong and his face was quite handsome. It was just that the corners of his lips were habitually pursed, and his expression was cold and solemn. He did not look like someone who was easy to talk to. What left the deepest impression was his eyes. His pupils were slightly dark red, and a similar color seeped out from the edges of his eyes, especially at the corners of his eyes, where the protruding veins and veins near his temples were intertwined. It was a rather uncomfortable feeling. Lieutenant Colonel Lu saw that the two of them were sizing each other up, but he pretended that he didn't know and didn't help to introduce them. Assistant Yen, what can I do for you? According to the command center's suggestion, a batch of detection equipment has been transferred from my company to be used to screen the suspects temporarily detained on the ship. Assistant Yan's face was expressionless as he directly operated his wristband. He indicated to Lieutenant Colonel Lu and quickly passed the authorization verification. Detection equipment? Lieutenant Colonel Lu asked curiously, is the search over? Not yet, but the precision of the equipment is quite high, and the installation and debugging will take some time. Understood. Lieutenant Colonel Lu felt a bit regretful. Since it was equipment acceptance as a supervisor, he had to be present. That was the end of his friendly interaction with the young female lawyer. He signaled Assistant Yen to wait for a moment and turned to Zhang Yingying with a smile. Miss Zhang, shall we stop here first? It's still early, so I'll arrange a cabin for you to rest first. I'll arrange for someone to send the information to you later. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Zhang Yingying knew that it was no longer suitable for her to stay in the monitoring center alone, so she took the initiative to shake Lieutenant Colonel Lu's hand and bid her farewell. When she passed by Assistant Yen, Zhang Yingying gave him a friendly smile. She narrowed her eyes and activated the automatic camera function of her contact lenses, saving a photo of the person's face. The corners of Assistant Yan's lips twitched. He didn't know if that was considered a response. His line of sight did not land on Zhang Yingying either. Judging from the angle, he was looking at the surveillance footage in the room. Zhang Yingying glanced back the instant she walked out the door. Lieutenant Colonel Lu could be considered quite cautious. He didn't want to give others a handle. He had long since indicated to his subordinates to switch out Luo Nan's close-up. Luo Nan's figure had already disappeared into a dozen or so similar images on the monitor screen. He couldn't be considered too eye-catching. But Zhang Yingying had a strong feeling. The focus of this Assistant Yan's gaze was aimed at Luo Nan, and it had been a long time since he moved. Walking in the corridor inside the warship, Zhang Yingying entered the image she had just taken into the database and confirmed the search criteria. Judging from the uniform, it's Sky Blue Security, a professional security company under Quantum Corporation. They're able to communicate directly with the military, so their position should be high up. And those eyes. A few seconds later, a warning sounded. Information listed as secret. You do not have sufficient authority. Zhang Yingying wasn't particularly surprised. She pursed her lips and switched to another channel. Not long after, he took out a simple personal file. The reason why he said it was simple was that there was still a considerable portion that had been blocked. However, she could already verify a portion of her conjecture from the current information. The electronic photo on top of the file was precisely Assistant Yan's appearance. He was just younger by 7 or 8 years, and he was currently revealing a spirited smile. Yan Yongbo, former lecturer of Acumen College. He left his post of his own accord in 90. His father, former professor of Acumen College, Yan Hong. Okay then. Enemies really do meet on a narrow road. Speaking of which, did he recognize me in the end? Zhang Yingying thought back to the conversation she had with Xia Junping before she boarded the warship. She had no choice but to make an amendment. This giant ship of Quantum Corporation doesn't care about little ants, but the spider and whatnot on it might not. This seemed to be a very troublesome choice. Give it up? Luo Nan's thoughts stirred, and the marvelous scene that appeared beneath the tip of his pen flowed within his mind. It's really cool. Luo Nan, who was very cool, was still drawing with his pen. Even though he had already entered the fixed space, locked onto the source of interference and confirmed the true identity of the specter, he didn't have any intentions of stopping. The feeling of the pen and mind merging into one was truly very marvelous. The burning wraith was an inconceivable existence. Luo Nan didn't know how to categorize it and determine its nature. Even though he had entered the fixed space, he didn't have too many clues as to how to deal with it. But when he held the luster pen in his hand and allowed the lines to flow from the tip of the pen, all the problems were no longer problems. The material and the mental, the real and the illusory, the present and the future. Multiple dimensions interweaved together to depict the same goal from multiple angles. His inspiration would never dry up no matter what. The distorted sketch of the prison building that was filled with symbolism revealed more and more clear conceptual clues. Luo Nan's lips unconsciously opened and closed slightly. He silently recited the mnemonic chant that he had long since become familiar with. He only chose the first 4 words. My heart's a prison. He silently recited it without a sound, but the intent that carried through it had never been as condensed as it was now. It broke through the boundary between the real and the illusory to attack the plane of the visualization. It was as if it had transformed into an iron hammer that smashed heavily onto the visualization diagram. It was like the ringing of a bell. It was like the striking of a chime. Countless silver threads were extracted from the diagram amidst the fine vibrations. They split apart to randomly construct countless flickering structures. And they clearly had a close relationship with the prison building in the notebook. Some were clear and proper. Some were distorted and blurry. There was also an enormous difference in their images. There were tightly woven fences inside. There was a sealed iron cage. There were leaping arcs of electricity. There was a malevolent beam gun. In short, each and every one of them was a symbol of violence and coercion. They were the embodiment of the details of the prison drawing. Due to the leaping of consciousness and the haphazard brushwork, the majority of the structures were only superficial. They didn't conform to the principles of construction at all. The time that they existed was extremely short. But every time the intertwining and shattering structure of silver threads swept past, the burning wraith that had already penetrated into the inner layer of the visualization diagram acted as if it was facing a great enemy. It moved endlessly in defense, cutting quite a sorry figure. The burning wraith also wanted to carry out interference and destruction. But the problem was that the process that unfolded in multiple dimensions at the same time had already completely exceeded the scope of its control. Luonan didn't understand why the burning wraith that was over 100 meters tall had gone wrong when it howled at the sky. It was actually so unbearable. But he wouldn't stop. The chanting never stopped. The visualization never stopped. The tip of the brush never stopped. Gradually, Luonan gave up on injecting the inspiration of the details into the sketch. Instead, he began to do subtraction. He revolved around the increasingly clear conceptual clues and strengthened them. Within the visualization diagram, those leaping and combining silver threads seemed to respond to the intense and pure intent of his mind. Hundreds and thousands of flashy but impractical constructions collapsed with a rumble, revealing the simple and pure composition of the tetrahedron once again. At the center of the diagram, at the center of the inscribed sphere, there was a crashing sound coming from the center of the sphere. It was as if the heart was trembling. The burning wraith actually lost the courage to linger any longer when faced with this change. Within the darkness, the light of the flames curled up and separated from the visualization diagram. It transformed into a streak of red light that pierced through the sky and left. This was the visualization plane. Where could it go? Before this thought could finish, the world of nothingness shook once more. The red light seemed to penetrate through an incorporeal membrane. After a slight pause, it increased its speed and pierced through the sky. Luonan's consciousness suddenly went into a daze the instant the membrane was penetrated. An ice-cold metal wall appeared in his field of vision. A notebook was placed on his lap and he was drawing with his pen. Chapter 16. Genius in 1 second. Remember Love Go? TalkNet, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Out-of-body state? Right now Luonan was like watching a supernatural movie. But before he had the time to experience the pros and cons, the burning wraith's red glow had already penetrated through the wall in the blink of an eye, disappearing without a trace. Oh, saying disappearing wasn't accurate. This was because there was still an indescribable, yet clearly distinguishable sensation that marked the burning wraith's position in the bottom of his heart. Luonan knew the reason. This was because the drawing under his pen was a self-portrait in name. In reality, it depicted a considerable range of mental and physical states. Naturally, this included the burning wraith. Oh, the unnatural distortion on the sketch of the prison building was it. Right now Luonan's visualization and drawing had already merged into one. It was difficult for each other. Since he had left an imprint on the sketch, how was it possible for him to not leave a trace in his mind? No matter where the burning wraith fled to, it still appeared clearly on Luonan's drawing and within his mind at this moment. And because of the burning wraith's abrupt escape, the dynamic change of the interference power stimulated Luonan's inspiration once again. His main body actually hadn't stopped writing under this inexplicable out-of-body state. Even though the sketch in his notebook couldn't contain any more details, his inspiration had already gushed out. It was unstoppable. The tip of his pen was practically piercing through the paper. It drew intertwined lines on the only empty space on the outside of the sketch. The constantly strengthening conceptual clues finally buzzed into shape under the casting of inspiration. It was just like, crash. On the visualization plane, a thick, heavy crow chain appeared like a predatory python amidst the trembling sound. It appeared from the center of the visualization diagram, exploding out with its long body. The incorporeal membrane that had just been pierced was torn apart once more. The crow chain then broke through the void and entered reality. It followed the direction the burning wraith fled in, breaking through the air. Luonan didn't know how long the chain was. The front half had already entered the void, but the center of the sphere still hadn't been pulled to its limit. Perhaps length had no meaning on this plane. In a split second, Luonan heard a sharp hiss. The crow chain, including his mind, made contact with the scorching hot and irritable burning wraith in this instant. The chains trembled and moved even faster, actually forcefully piercing through the other party. Immediately after, countless silver threads burst forth, shuttling back and forth, interlocking with each other, firmly locking the burning wraith in place. Caught it. But Luonan was only delayed by 1,000th of a second. Before he could taste the taste of victory, an enormous pulling force passed through the long chain and fiercely acted upon his body. The burning wraith also didn't know where it got its strength from, but it was like a wild boar that had gone berserk. Disregarding everything, it carried the chains and madly leapt forward. Luonan was unable to control the explosive charge of the specter. Even his body was affected by some sort of strange and mysterious power. He just felt his entire body lighten, and the intersecting images of reality and visualization rapidly changed. The environment of the confinement room was replaced by the various cabins, corridors, and mechanical structures of the ship. This time it really was an out-of-body experience. Moreover, it was forcibly dragged out of his body by the berserk burning wraith through the wall. What was this? The physical laws of the soul? At first, Luonan was still thinking whether or not there were people who could see this unscientific scene. But soon he was certain that the soldiers, officers, and AI machines that came and went on the warship were completely unaware of the chase that was happening above their heads. The tightly guarded transport ship had been completely transformed into an undefended racecourse. At least it was like this for now. It must be said that this was quite a novel experience. Luonan also tried to observe his current state of existence. He worked hard for a long time before coming to a preliminary conclusion. In his soul state, his form was very close to that of the burning wraith. It was just that he didn't have that oppressive dark red fiery glow. He was more like a shadow of nothingness. Luonan still wanted to carefully experience it for a bit. But after a short period of muddle-headedness, he sensed a chill that rapidly increased in intensity. It was simply like he was raging through a world of ice and snow with his naked body. The cruel cold wind sliced at his body like blades. The incorporeal cold wind was simply unavoidable. The incorporeal soul didn't have the effect of splattering blood in all directions, but the intense feeling of pain was real and real. It was very clear that the situation was tilting in a dangerous direction. And it was clearly closely related to the hasty and passive out-of-body experience. Luonan's first thought was to hurry and return to his main body. But right now his mind and the chains coexisted. They were all bound to the burning wraith. He was completely muddle-headed as to how to unbind and how to break free. The more muddle-headed he was, the more he needed to do something. Luonan did 3 things in this life-threatening moment. First, he made a comparison. Which was more painful, the cold wind cutting the soul or the psychotropic drug composition cutting the nerves? Conclusion: there seemed to be no difference. Second, he made a confirmation. In the end, was there still a connection between the soul and the main body? Conclusion: the main body was in quite a bit of pain over there. Third, he raised a question. Since there was a connection between the soul and the main body, where was the connection? Conclusion: I don't know anything else, but it certainly existed on the visualization plane and the draft drawing, even though it was a bit abstract. The first conclusion strengthened his conviction. The second structure gave him a clear direction. The third conclusion gave him a method. At this very moment, his firm conviction transformed into another wave of chanting sounds. The first 4 words rumbled within the visualization plane and within the soul. My heart's a prison. The visualization plane still blended together with the draft drawing. Between reality and illusion, the messy yet distinct layers of the prison building seemed to be truly constructed. It was piled up layer by layer, covering the limits of Luonan's range of perception like a dark cloud. The out-of-body soul appeared to be far away from the main body, but it was actually still within the range of the prison building. The burning wraith was the same. The heavily chained crow shuttled back and forth within this seemingly illusory building, transforming into beams, pillars, thick walls, prisons, torture tools. And it was also at this moment that Luonan truly understood the essence of the heavily chained crow. No matter what kind of prison it was the embodiment of coercive rules. Coercive power was certainly the #1 priority. There must be the power of punishment when facing a disobedient prisoner. The burning wraith appeared to be fleeing far away, but as long as it didn't truly throw off the shackles of the chains, it would inevitably suffer a merciless suppression. The heavily chained crow hummed in an instant, carrying out Luonan's will. The power stored deep within it was finally displayed. As the result of the accumulation of ideas and inspiration, every strand of the heavily chained crow divided into silver strands. Every chain constructed was linked to Luonan's mind. This movement was tantamount to piercing the bound burning wraith from the inside to the outside. It was wrapped and twisted. It was so much so that it was directly sliced and analyzed. A large amount of information was fed back. It was too late to sort through in a short time. The burning wraith hissed in pain. There were no sound waves, but there were seemingly substantial psychic waves that spread to the surroundings. It seemed that this painful emotion was far too intense. The wall lights in the long corridor of the warship suddenly dimmed. In the next moment, the entire row of red warning lights lit up. A tangible and intangible warning sound penetrated through the entire space of the warship. Warning. Warning. Invasion of mutants. I repeat. Invasion of mutants. Level 3 mutant state. Darksider life form has appeared. All conventional armed personnel enter combat positions. Prepare tranquilizers. Enter standby state of AI. Activating the deep blue platform. The burners have entered a state of emergency. Chapter 17. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? The web provides you with wonderful novels to read. In a short few seconds, a dark red alarm light spread a tense and serious atmosphere to every corner of the transport ship. Although this sort of situation was rare for the military, there were always rules to follow. It was enough as long as the various departments and systems obeyed orders. But the problem was that there weren't only soldiers on the transport ship. The moment the alarm rang out, the engineers of Quantum Corporation in Area C who were setting up the site and debugging the equipment were all dumbfounded. They stopped what they were doing and looked at each other, not knowing what to do. The supervisor present, Lieutenant Colonel Liu, had the highest military rank and was also quite experienced. He immediately said, "All non-combat personnel cease work and await further instructions." Lieutenant Colonel Liu was also busy contacting his superiors to confirm the situation. It wasn't easy to get clear instructions. He raised his head to look for the person in charge of Quantum Corporation, but the corner of his eye twitched. As the head of security, Liang Yongbo was sitting at the edge of the construction site. He didn't even raise his head as he fiddled with his wristband, ignoring the changes in the outside world. "They're bragging about how calm you are." Lieutenant Colonel Liu had always disliked this sort of arrogant and conceited fellow. He immediately straightened his face and walked over with large strides. Just as he was about to speak, a swift and fierce man wearing a sky-blue security uniform rushed in front of him and asked Yen Yongbo for instructions. "Captain, we've entered a state of emergency. Do you want to warm it up?" "Warm it up?" "Bull black." Liang Yongbo still didn't raise his head as he calmly said, "You're wearing an exoskeleton armor and leaping around the warship. Have you ever thought about the feelings of the military?" "You haven't, right? If you haven't, then ask Lieutenant Colonel Liu." Lieutenant Colonel Liu had just walked over when he was stopped by these words. His imposing manner weakened. It was at this moment that Liang Yongbo raised his head to look at him. "Lieutenant Colonel Liu, what do you think?" The corner of Lieutenant Colonel Liu's eye twitched twice. In the end, he still forcefully held back his anger and forced himself to speak. "Command. The invasion of the Darksider life forms has a high probability of being related to the incident at the Research and Development District. Quantum Corporation's burners will participate in the pursuit and will temporarily be assigned to the Special Forces Squad 7. This is the Communications Identification Code." Liang Yongbo received the relevant data and nodded. "Very well then, I accept the order. But Lieutenant Colonel Liu, I suspect this accident has something to do with the people detained on the warship." I hope the military can increase their surveillance efforts to avoid any unexpected situations. CK your grandpa. Lieutenant Colonel Liu finally flew into a rage when a problem was pointed out in the matter he was in charge of. He couldn't be bothered to say anything more, so he turned around and left with a dark expression. Liang Yongbo didn't say much. He stood up and led Blackie in another direction. On the way he sent a set of data to Blackie. If that idiot wants to come, he'll need some time to vent his anger. There won't be any changes to the defense. Wait for an opportunity to move to Area A2. Make a big move. If you meet this person, create some accidents. The data was projected on Blackie's retina, showing the handsome and quiet face of a young man. Love Go smalt said net cold Black was expressionless. He only nodded slightly, engraving that young face deep in his heart. The alarms and warning lights did not stop. Under the flickering dark red light, the prison building that was built between reality and illusion began to collapse after a brief moment of glory. Soon it turned into ruins and returned to nothingness. After all, Luo Nan hadn't truly constructed a reasonable structure yet. There were many overly casual future conceptions involved within. Being able to temporarily appear for a period of time was already a pretty decent confirmation. Of course, the most important thing was that the burning wraith was already completely unable to stir up a storm. Walala. The heavily chained crow continued to retreat. No matter how much the burning wraith struggled, the chains that bound its body continued to dissect, slice and analyze. The layers of the binding force gradually pointed towards the core essence. A layer of faint bloody light could be seen clearly flowing on the dark base of the chains. The bloody light changed against the flow, drawing back a marvelous heat. It flowed without end. This was the energy that came from the burning wraith. The accumulation of information analysis began to display its effect. A portion of the burning wraith's energy circulation mechanism was cracked. The chains drew back in time, giving Luo Nan support while weakening the burning wraith's strength. Such an outcome was truly timely for Luo Nan, who had left his body in a hurry. The energy poured into Luo Nan's soul. It was like a mouthful of hot soup in a state of extreme hunger. It was like a thick layer of clothing wrapped around one's body in the middle of winter. The results were immediate. The cold wind blades were immediately blocked outside. Within the space of 2 to 3 breaths, even Luo Nan's main body had the corresponding feedback. The state of hunger that was nearing its limit was somewhat alleviated. The situation was always like this. The burning wraith that had lost a large amount of blood had already turned from a wild boar that ran around randomly into a sled dog that wasn't very obedient. Then, it irreversibly transformed into a dead dog. Luo Nan saw the dead dog a few seconds later. The burning wraith was indeed well behaved. It floated in the air sickly. There weren't too many changes to its outer appearance. Even if there were changes, it wouldn't be seen. Only the outer layer of flames had clearly dimmed quite a bit. But there was something very eye-catching. Behind this toy, let's just call it behind for the time being. It dragged a very long tail. The heavily chained crow continued to control, slice and analyze the burning wraith without end. And it seemed that this would continue for a very long period of time. Even though Luo Nan was in his soul state, he still let out a long breath out of habit. He had finally resolved this inexplicable trouble. He could finally put his energy back on the plane of reality. Luo Nan naturally paid attention to the alarm that resonated throughout the entire ship. Let's not talk about anything else. The terrible negative term, mutant, was already enough to explain a lot of things. But what was a Darksider life form? Luo Nan searched his memories, but there were no results. A clear change had already occurred in the surrounding situation at this time. There wasn't a shadow of a single person within the long internal corridor. But long and narrow cracks had opened up on the walls and floor of the corridor at an unknown time. Pale white smoke could be seen emitting from the cracks, quickly pervading the entire corridor. At the end of the corridor, the muffled sound of footsteps could be heard. 3 majestic exoskeleton armors formed a battle formation. They advanced forward step by step within the misty smoke. Aside from the smoke, the corridor was completely empty. There wasn't a single thing to hide in. The people on the other side looked as if they were facing a great enemy. It was as if there was an incorporeal monster that could hunt and kill at any time. Luo Nan suddenly had a very marvelous feeling when he witnessed this scene. Incorporeal. Incorporeal. Why does it seem like this group of people have come to deal with me? The smoke within the corridor grew thicker and thicker. Luonan's mind stirred slightly. He didn't engage in the galloping horse style of charging forward like a violent hurricane. Instead, he pulled the half-dead burning wraith and circled around the corridor. He was like a true specter as he passed through the metal wall and entered the adjacent cabin. Then he charged forward all the way towards the direction of the main body. Chapter 18. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Zhou provides you with wonderful novels to read. After Luonan flew past a few cabins, he discovered, actually, the situation here was quite similar to the situation in the corridor. Several transmission ports were opened within the cabins. Faint white smoke flowed out in an unending stream, and the concentration was even higher due to the cramped space. Many of the soldiers were fully armed and standing in the smoke. Their expressions did not change. It was obvious that they were very familiar with this situation. Of course, the smoke was definitely not poisonous. Luonan had paid special attention to the effect the smoke had on the soul body due to his previous sense of danger. But judging from the current situation, there was nothing unusual. He suppressed his doubts at the bottom of his heart and focused more on experiencing the feeling of passing through walls. Is this what an out-of-body experience looks like? Luonan used various methods to penetrate through 7 to 8 metal walls in a row before confirming his own state once more. His grandfather's formatting theory was a field of metaphysical knowledge to a large degree. Luonan would read a few books on philosophy, metaphysics, and mystic arts in addition to his usual research. It was not a difficult task for him to accept his current state. However, Luonan also sensed that this ability of his was far from reaching the level of perfection when compared to the ancient records and the knowledge of the mystic arts. When he'd just left his body, he'd almost been dismembered by the cold air of the outside world. Thinking about it now, he still had lingering fears. He had to rely on the burning wraith, this external fuel tank, to ensure that he could cruise for a long time. But no matter what, the feeling of dog sled and riding the clouds was completely different. There was a huge difference between passive and active states. This was the first time Luonan had relied purely on his own will to move after his out-of-body experience. Of course, he wasn't used to all sorts of things. Love Gok Smaltsaid Netka. Most of the time there will be some redundant actions and thoughts. More importantly, he had not truly adapted to observing the world in the form of a soul. Luonan had a deep understanding of the nervous system. He quickly discovered that on the soul plane, the traditional 5 senses of sight, hearing, nose, tongue, body, and mind had undergone a large-scale transformation in their operating mechanisms. The visual and auditory processes on this plane were actually an inefficient process. Luonan was like a radar in his soul state. He was constantly receiving all sorts of wavelengths from the outside world. The source was so rich that it far exceeded the types of signals that the human nervous system could receive and process. If he stuck to his habit, most of these signals would naturally be lost. Only some of the signals that the nervous system normally processed would be channeled in and transferred to the body for processing before the results were presented in the form of the 5 senses. Not to mention the problem of losing a large amount of waveband signals. Even the process signals would be distorted to a large extent due to the lack of real stimulation to the nervous system. At the very least, he had almost lost his sense of touch. Seems like it's better to deal with it directly. But in this case, how to compile it became a big problem. Luonan deliberately went to sense and gather information. He immediately tumbled a few times due to the chaotic and complex amount of information in his surroundings. It seemed that it would be a long process for him to adapt to life on the soul plane. That is to say, with the change of thought, the level and range of the soul sense would be partially expanded. It was like a classical radio in which one could occasionally hear something interesting amidst the clattering noise. This was an extremely novel experience. Luonan didn't mind spending a bit of energy to mull over it. At this moment, a few intermittent keywords caught his attention. Luonan's mind stirred slightly, and a small deviation occurred in the direction he was heading. While he was releasing his senses, he was still separated by several layers of metal walls, yet clamorous noises assaulted his face. Luonan actually felt a strange sense of intimacy as he entered. This was because this was the place where Lian Yu, Li Xueqing and the other rich kids were imprisoned. Luo Nan never thought that he would be able to enter and observe the environment he once stayed in such a marvelous way. He clearly existed, yet the others were completely unaware of it. It gave off a marvelous feeling of unreality. Lian Yu and the other rich kids were completely unaware that a specter had appeared beside them. They were having a great time arguing. Facts proved that one had to first find the cause of everything within oneself. The atmosphere between the group of rich kids wasn't any better after a certain pervert was imprisoned by himself. Because of the series of events involving the banned drugs, the imprisonment and Li Xueqing, the group of people went from lamenting to complaining to arguing and clamoring. The atmosphere unwittingly became tense again. The alarm of the mutant and the strange situation of smoke pervading the air caused them to quiet down for a while. But it was unknown who took the lead and arguments appeared once more. But this time the content of the argument had a bit of meaning. The focal point of their argument was the mutant species. The evidence for the mutant species spreading through the ocean is conclusive. You don't need to talk nonsense, okay? Are your ears stuffed with shit? Why would I deny the spreading through the ocean? I'm just saying that there's a lot of evidence pointing to the appearance of a new source of infection. The source of infection came from your mouth, right? F***CK. The so-called mutant species referred to the large-scale, highly contagious, mutated phenomena that began to appear in the later stages of World War III. It was simply the most destructive and terrifying example of the world's biology. The most popular explanation for its origin was this. In the depths of some oceanic trench in the Pacific Ocean, a door leading to the depths of the Earth's crust had been opened. Or perhaps it was an even more inconceivable place. Therefore the fatal pollution came from the ocean. It passed through the marine biosphere to invade the freshwater system and the continent's ecosphere. In the short span of a few years, all sorts of plants, fungi, insects, animals, and even a small portion of humans received varying degrees of pollution. Under the catalysis of genetic mutation, they developed into all sorts of vicious and cruel monstrous life forms. For a time, they were at the very top of the food chain even now. Before the appearance of Quantum Corporation's Deep Blue platform, humanity was in dire straits when faced with such a terrifying species. They could only rely on large metropolitan areas to carry out their defenses. It was truly unbearable to recall. Because it was a matter of life and death, the mutant species was undoubtedly the hottest topic after World War III. Then you explain. What is a Darksider life form? The Mutant Species Encyclopedia was published in the year 2091. I have the complete set. There are 17 major species and over 2,000 types of mutations. Which eye of yours saw a Darksider life form? Sure, if you think your encyclopedia is a holy scripture, then I'm convinced. You're so stupid that I'm convinced. Wait. Finally, someone came out to stop the quarrel. There's no need to be angry about this matter. A new species of mutant can jump out at any time. We're all amateurs. It's impossible for us to figure it out. Hey Taozi, your old man is a big financial backer of the field laboratory. Have you ever heard of this thing before? Lu Tao, who wore vintage gold-rimmed glasses, looked refined and refined. He could be considered a small anomaly in the crowd. He normally didn't speak much, but he had a certain shocking flavor. He had been holding back his big move as soon as he heard about the Darksider life form. Now that he finally had the opportunity, he chuckled. Darksider life form? Treat it like a specter. It's a pretty good angle to cut into. Chapter 19. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go? We provide you with wonderful novels to read. The cabin was quiet for a moment. Then someone laughed. Spectre. Are you talking about ghosts? You can interpret it however you want. In any case, from what I can see, a so-called Darksider life form is a kind of thing that you can't see or touch. Something that floats around you. Spectre is a more suitable description. Atazi, you're so disgusting. You're so creepy. A pretty vase seized the opportunity to act spoiled. Actually, when Lu Tao mentioned it, the group of people didn't think much of it. But after being tainted by the coquettish voice of the pretty vase, quite a few people had goosebumps. Some people turned their heads to look at the billowing smoke all around them. They really did feel a bit creeped out in their hearts. Lu Tao actually loved this kind of tone the most. He adjusted his glasses and pretended to be calm. that's the truth. Regarding the Darksider life form, it's only been 1 or 2 years since the industry put forth a related concept. Only a few papers have been published. Apart from the various high-end laboratories, the only ones who are more familiar with it are the military. Looking at the response of the warship, it can be seen that they've had many dealings with the Darksider life form. This is a good thing. The group of scoundrels really detested Lu Tao's habit of keeping them in suspense. Some people were already impatient. We can't see or touch them. What the hell is there to research? Don't tell me you're thinking that people are stupid and have too much money to swindle funds. Get lost. Lu Tao laughed and scolded. He finally cut to the chase. Why did I mention the military? It's because the military lists the Darksider life form as a special type of mutant. However, the vast majority of research institutes hold different opinions. They believe that the two are not the same thing. The closest way of saying it is to guess that this thing might be the primal virus that causes the mutation. Ah. It was still the pretty vase from before. But this time she was truly frightened. She wasn't the only one. Everyone's expressions weren't too good. The shadow of the mutant species was always hanging over everyone's head. Even the rich second generation was no exception. The mutant species that had already taken form could still arouse their interest in research and discussion. But if it was the mutant itself that made people wish they were dead, and it was a monster that everyone avoided like the plague. Lu Tao spread his hands. Can you guys not scare yourselves? What I said was just one of the most ridiculous guesses. This thing has almost no resemblance to a virus. In comparison, even the so-called dark matter life form is more reliable than it. The beautiful vase slapped him coquettishly and automatically entered the flirting mode. Everyone around them was cursing. Lu Tao felt that he had been wronged. He simply didn't try to be mysterious and directly gave a simple introduction. In short, these Darksider life forms are like specters. They truly exist, but they can't be seen or touched. According to the nature determined in the laboratory, it can be determined that it almost never comes into contact with common particles, does not react with electromagnetic waves, and does not actively emit radiation. This also meant that in most natural environments, it was impossible to directly observe them using any conventional means. Well, under normal circumstances, they won't interact with anything in this world. Someone laughed. If it doesn't work, what's the threat? The people on the ship are all nervous. Are they trying to scare us? I mean, under normal circumstances. Have you ever thought about why these things are called living things? This is because under certain circumstances, these things have the ability to interfere with the material plane. Moreover, they have a certain purpose. What purpose? There are thousands and thousands of variations. But according to statistics, nearly 40% of the cases where interference occurs are interference. Stimulation of the creature's emotions, causing people to lose concentration, be irritated, easily angered, sensitive, and so on. Luo Nan, who was listening to the side, was finally stirred. He sized up the burning wraith once more. This fellow was still in a dead dog state right now, but everything that had happened before had perfectly verified Lu Tao's description. The Darksider life form is extremely dangerous. Remember, the parts that we can't observe are meaningless to us because they don't interact with us at all. But as long as we are able to discover them, they are certainly threatening. This is because they are attempting to influence and disturb our plane. How do they disturb? It's very simple. There's an old saying, know thyself and know thy enemy. Under normal circumstances, the Darksider life form doesn't interact with us. But once they have an intention, they must first understand us, make contact with us, and collect our information. This is like an active radar. Normally, if the radar isn't turned on, no one would be able to discover its existence. But if they search with a certain purpose, they will certainly emit a beam and expose their position. Luo Nan, who was observing the burning wraith, was suddenly startled. His attention became unprecedentedly focused. Of course, the Darksider life form is 10,000 times more hidden than a radar. They don't even need to emit a detection beam or anything. They just need to absorb the various wavebands in the air. Then they can analyze and process them in a way that we are unable to understand. And this is also the only opportunity we have to detect them. Lu Tao was high from talking. His arm pointed at the surrounding mist. Do you see this shadow mist? This mist releases a type of special particle. They are extremely sensitive to the various wave bands in the air. Once they discover which direction has a relatively concentrated nature change in the wave band, they can transmit the relevant data to the central AI through various sensors. They can conduct analysis and determine the probability of the Darksider life form appearing. Lian Yu, who hadn't spoken all this time, also became interested. Her specialty just so happened to be communications. Daoist, you know quite a bit about this. Lu Tao was waiting for these words. He immediately pretended to be calm. This sort of shadow mist combat technique was developed by a laboratory in the wilderness that my family funded. At this time, there was naturally no lack of people supporting him. F***ck Daoist, you've hidden yourself quite deeply. You guys have earned quite a bit from this technology. Not bad. Not bad. Lu Tao was beaming with laughter. He felt extremely refreshed in his heart. But Luo Nan, who was floating beside him, had a different kind of mood at this time. He looked at the surrounding mist and was actually a bit stupefied for a time. Lian Yu, who hadn't spoken much, asked at this time, "It's so hard to even discover the Darksider life form. How do we deal with it?" Right now there's only the burner. In fact, the discovery of the Darksider life form happened after Quantum Corporation introduced the burner and the Deep Blue platform. It can be seen from actual combat that the burner has a relatively high sensitivity towards the Darksider life form. Only the burner can control the Deep Blue walkers. Only by establishing the archetype format and igniting the format of fire can they cause direct damage to the Darksider life form. Then, Lian Yu still wanted to ask, but she didn't expect a long beep to open the cabin's outer door. The sliding metal door was still moving when a strong and vigorous figure leaped in from the mist. A thick firearm was set up and tiny red dots of light danced chaotically throughout the room. They streaked across the faces of the rich kids who were at a loss as to what to do. "Get down. All of you get down." A fierce and unyielding voice penetrated into their eardrums through the amplification of the loudspeaker. "Everyone crawl forward in order. Immediately go outside. There will be people outside to receive you." The person who had thrown himself into the room was certainly a rather brave and capable character. But after staying in the army for a long time, it was inevitable that he would overlook the fact that this group of rich kids before his eyes really weren't battle-hardened warriors. They were already completely scared silly when faced with this sudden situation. It was unknown who it was that cleared his throat after a mere half a second, but a sharp cry filled the entire cabin. Being spurred on by the cry, the restlessness of fear engulfed the hearts of everyone like a storm. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.